If we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age, made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of perverted science.
My son, there is a great storm gathering in the world, a black fury which will not spend itself for many years. There will be no safety in arms, no answer in science. It may rage till every flower of culture is trampled, and all human things are leveled in vast chaos. Such was my vision when Napoleon was still a name unknown. And I see it now, more clearly with each hour. Do you say I am mistaken?
No, a crash such as that came once before, and then there were the Dark Ages lasting 500 years.
The Dark Ages that will come will cover the earth like a pall. But I believe that you will live through the storm. Beyond that, my vision weakens.
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the dooms to sleep. Meanwhile, we'll dig.
Greetings, this is Byrne, the Anadromist, coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia. And today I want to do something a little different. The events of this Annus Horribilis 2020, this horrifying year, have brought to mind thoughts that I've had over the years about the future. And so I thought I would share them. We started off this video with a introduction that I did for a radio show that I did in 1994, I believe it was, WFMU in New York City. And it was 1995, that's right. So 1994 was the year I was a road manager for a rock band for part of the summer. 1995. So I made this show called The Prelude to the New Dark Age. WFMU was an experimental station, and they would give you the license to do whatever. So I had a show on Saturday night that ran between 3 in the morning and 6 a.m. Well, who's listening? Well, it's the New York metropolitan area. Someone's listening. So I decided to do a show. I'd been thinking for quite a while up to that point that we were slipping towards a new dark age. Some of the things that I saw then was over-reliance on oil for everything. Of course, the environment, and I wasn't even concerned with the concept of climate change. I was just concerned with the fact that we were essentially creating more and more junk that would end up as trash. We were polluting more. The developing countries were polluting more. And it was right around the time when How did the marketers of America respond to the problem? They created more and more plastic bottles and got rid of the glass. Creating the situation we find in the middle of oceans. So I saw that wasn't good. But more importantly, I saw that already I could see very clearly that people were over-propagandized, that they were living in such a way that it just couldn't go on and on. Right now, in the tensions of the moment, I'm not going to address anything contemporary. I'm not going to talk about the pandemic. I'm not going to talk about the George Floyd protests or riots. I'm not going to talk about all the other things. But nevertheless, this is such a tense moment. I'm still just looking at it. And I'm finding it filled with darkness this time. And and part of the reasons are the same things I've been seeing for years. What is a dark age? I think in popular imagination, a dark age is when, people confuse it with the apocalypse. Most people don't even know what the apocalypse is. It comes from the book of Revelation. It means, apocalypse really means an unveiling, a revealing. And so the book of Revelation in the Bible was an unveiling of the end of times and unveiling of the second coming of Christ. But the word apocalypse has come to mean now this massive destruction of everything, and then people will live in a post-apocalyptic world. And yeah, a dark age would come out of some big event like that, but that's not really what a dark age is. A dark age, see, a lot of people have this misconception that, more and more now, people are seeing Rome as this enlightened period, and then the dark age came afterwards, and people will say, well, Christianity helped bring that on, and blah, blah, blah. And people really demonstrate their ignorance when they do things. There was a kind of dark ages. People in the Renaissance thought all the time before that was the dark age. All the time back to the Roman era. This is where we start getting this myth that Rome was great, and then the Middle Ages, what we now call the Middle Ages, the medieval period, was just darkness. But it really wasn't true. All the developments in science and literature and such come out of the Middle Ages, and we wouldn't have what we have today without them. It was slow, but it wasn't dark, except there was a period, the first few hundred years, after the fall of the Roman Empire. And the fall of the Roman Empire wasn't like one day. Many people say that, the fall starts after the first century and takes like 300-400 years. And the truth is, even around 500 AD, you don't see this immediate collapse. What you see, Simon Schama in his History of Britain series is very interesting. He talks about how the British culture of the British Isles, of Great Britain, didn't suddenly become like Anglo-Saxon or something. It's just slowly they were cut off from Rome, things stopped working, and eventually over the course of 50 to 100 years, they were no longer where they thought they were. Jane Jacobs wrote this book, Dark Age Ahead. She was very interesting in thinking about these things. In the book, she discusses mostly the collapse of institutions that had always worked. She calls a dark age a time of forgetting, and I think that is a very good definition of what a dark age is. It's a time of forgetting. By those lights, we have already entered a time of forgetting, except, of course, people will point out, well, yeah, but we have everything. It's online. We'll deal with that in just a moment.
Now, the title of your new book, Dark Age Ahead, sounds very ominous. Yet you say this is not only a gloomy, but it's a hopeful book also. What's your warning? What's your main purpose in writing the book at this time?
Well, I think that we've made a lot of mistakes and are on the wrong track in many ways, particularly with respect to institutions and ways we've been taking for granted that we can stabilize ourselves.
Now let's talk, what is a dark age? I mean, when people got this image of a dark age, of nothing working, how are you using the phrase in this book?
Well, I'm using it as the breakdown, actually a dead end of culture. And culture embodies everything about our behavior, and everything is connected with everything else.
We have this sense of almost our cultural immortality. You know, let's look at how
Yes.
big we are. But you make a very, very interesting point that you say that the printing and the press, and especially the internet, gives us a false sense of the permanence of our culture.
That's right.
Explain that.
Well, we think that because we have all these pictures and books and records, that we're invulnerable to cultural loss.
That we can't forget because it's there.
Yeah, because it's all there. That's a wrong assumption on two counts. First count, cultures are not primarily passed down by pictures and books, but by word of mouth and by example.
By experience.
But we are there have been times of forgetting. I think that time, for instance, right after the fall of Rome, one of the things that everyone forgot was crop rotation. Pretty big deal. Well, how could they have forgotten that? Weren't they out still working in the fields? Didn't they just pass these things on to their children? No, actually, one of the big problems with Rome was so many people had come into the cities. And, you know, you've heard the phrase bread and circuses. And that's what they were being given to live on. The bread was the dole. You know, it's the money, essentially the money and food the government gave you to live. And the circuses were to keep people entertained. Of course, there's nothing like that going on now. But no, it's so that what happened was people, you know, had forgotten these things. Then Gothic raiders came through, other tribes, and essentially upended the cultural situation, creating what would then be called feudalism. They didn't call it feudalism there, but that's what we call it now, looking back, where you have the house, the lord of the manor, you know, that kind of thing, and then the people living on that person's land. But by that time, crop rotation had been forgotten, and that certainly wasn't the only thing. Now, I don't want to talk about the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages. I want to talk about what I feel is coming to us. And so, you know, one thing that's been going on in the air a lot, increasingly, people are talking about a possible civil war in America. And all I can say is it will not look like any civil war in the past, if that happens. And unfortunately, with the tensions of recent times, I don't see an answer. You know, that is to say, I see two sides who live in their own worlds. And it's very hard for them to cross over and talk to each other. And as long as that continues, there will indeed be a civil war. It's just that simple. You know, people are now using this phrase, silence is violence, which I consider a bit of Orwellian ingsoc newspeak. Because you know what? Violence is violence. And that's what a civil war would unleash. You know, people want perfection. Perfection does not exist. All the worst things in history have come essentially from the desire to create perfect systems. There are no perfect systems. But I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about, you see, here's the effect of a civil war. What happens to the world? You know, what happens to the world in the event of an American Civil War? Think about that for just a minute. Basically, the entire world will be upended. everything you've ever thought was solid will become very fluid and loose, and a lot of it will sink. And that's not the only threat on the horizon. If, for instance, my country, America, manages to find some modicum of sanity and learns to talk to itself again, there's still the problem that we could be engulfed in a foreign war. And the two main primary possible belligerents would be either Russia or China, or Russia and China. But I think China would be number one. And here's the thing that people aren't thinking of. If we go to war with China, well, of course, everyone worries about nuclear weapons, but we still have a bit of a grasp on, okay, we're not going to use that. That's like the very last thing. But what would be the very first thing in the event of an actual war? Well, it's the way I'm talking to you right now. It's what's online. Because the war in the future will not be like any wars in the past. And one of the first sources that people will attack is everything online. If I were one of the belligerents, the first thing I would attack is communications, online attacks. And that leads to some very disturbing thoughts. Where is all of our knowledge? Our knowledge is in technology. There's a man, James Bridle, who has been talking about how we have surrendered our knowledge to technology. He points out that given what we see with our eyes, what we know, if we are given a technological program or other material that supposedly helps us, even in the face of what we know. And he uses this in terms of, this isn't just stupid people. Like he talks about pilots, jet pilots, who know how to fly their plane with their eyes, who know all the evasive maneuvers, all the, emergency protocols. And yet, while being in a situation where the technology was giving you completely wrong information versus what you knew to be true. It was amazing how many times the jet pilots chose the technological information. And there's another phenomena he discusses called death by GPS. People in the park services in America coined this phrase to discuss people who were driving in a car, following their GPS through someplace like Death Valley, and they're so convinced that what they see on their monitor, their little screen, is more real than what they're seeing with their eyes, that they drive off into the worst parts of Death Valley and die because the heat is so bad there, it will kill you very quickly. But that's not the only place. People who have driven into rivers because the GPS said to turn here or to do this, or that, they did not understand.
So we face a future in which we have ever more data about the world, and yet we know ever less about it. And that is a core character of a new dark age. There's this idea that if we could just gather more and more information about the world, we'd have this complete overview. That's ultimately what big data is. It's this view that you can get so much information that you have a total view, and you produce a kind of perfect model of the world. And then instead of looking at the world, you look at the model and it tells you everything. But actually the last 100 years of computation shows us every time that the model isn't good enough. That when we try to use it instead of the world, it continues to fail. That big data is always, always insufficient. And it's often overwhelming too. So it feels like we have no control. So it both doesn't work and it demoralizes us.
But that's not just GPS, it's not just statistics, it's not just that kind of information. What I'm seeing right now is people simply living inside their own propaganda holes, and they can't see outside of it. They cannot take what they see with their eyes. Even, like, for instance, I will watch, for news events, I will tend to look for raw footage rather than someone discussing the event. Why? The raw footage is going to let me see what they're seeing. Their discussion of it is going to usually be pointed in one way or another. I don't want the propaganda. But then again, sometimes the people taking videos are propagandists themselves, and there's been quite a few instances of that, where they're looking for certain things, looking for police brutality, they're looking for burning buildings. You can craft a narrative out of anything, and the situation is so big that people forget that what they're looking at, especially on big news channels and such, but also on just about everything else, is edited. And editing changes the nature of it. And in fact, a lot of people will say, well, there's a big conspiracy in the media. But as Francis Schaeffer pointed out, and I'll play that clip for you here, you don't need a conspiracy. All you need is that people all agree this is what we want to see.
It's always unfair to say the media does this or the press does that. There are always individuals or individual publications, for example, that are not included in the generalization. But the mass media can be used by an authoritarian manipulating government or an elite. The elite gives the arbitrary absolutes, and then not only TV, but all the mass media can be used for manipulation. And a plot or conspiracy are not needed. All that is needed is that the people in the places of influence and those who decide what is the news have in common the modern results of humanism, the modern worldview, which we have considered at length in this series. When the perspective, the worldview of the elite, coincides with some of the influential news carriers, it does not have to be all, then either consciously or unconsciously, the media becomes an instrument for manipulation.
So people are locked in these irrational bubbles. They cannot see outside of them. Well, you can say whatever you want about the present situation. But what this really means is that the road to the future is looking pretty shot. A natural development upon the things that, say, built Western civilization looks pretty much out of the picture at this point. For one thing, even in academia, the place where these ideas are supposed to be passed on, everyone's been handed this idea that, well, there's all these competing narratives, read spin, all this different spin that people are putting on things. So you can't really trust anything. So we have to go in and deconstruct the past. Something was wrong in the past. Now we declare it to be null and void. And now we get rid of all the symbols of it. I mean, I study music history. One of the things that I study is American music history. And the most taboo subject in American music history, and I've had this just very recently underscored, is blackface minstrel music. Basically, you don't see the images because they are loaded with, racism, obviously. But rather than confronting and dealing with these things, we have pushed them out of the way. So, for instance, the other day I was looking online for a a copy of this one record I have in vinyl, but I wanted a copy here in Georgia since it looks like it's going to unfortunately take a couple of years to get my stuff from Alaska to here, if I can even get it because of the situation. That's another. Maybe I'll talk about that at the end. But so I'm looking and I find this record. It's a recreation. It was done in the early 1970s. A recreation of what minstrel music sounded like in the 1830s and 40s. Amazing, amazing recreation. Amazing music, scary lyrics, but this is one of the fountainheads of all American music. You don't understand the rest of American music history unless you really understand what happened during this moment, where white people put on blackface and pretended to be black, having no real conception of what it meant to be black. Romanticizing the plantations, using, what we would now consider horrifying language, but was considered normal language then. And yet it was also through this whole minstrel cycle that black folks actually said, hey, can I be a part of this? Because I can do this better than you. You see, and so you have people like Bert Williams, or then you have something like Al Jolson. Jewish, roots, puts on blackface to entertain white people, but not only white people. Black people liked it too. They liked that early jazz. In fact, the NAACP said Al Jolson has done more to help people know about our culture than anyone else. Today, if there was a Warner Brothers DVD that came out a few years back, The Jazz Singer. Now, the standard image of the jazz singer was Al Jolson, like this. White gloves, black clothes, huge white lips, and that is no longer visible. You have to you can hardly find images of it in the booklet and stuff that goes with it. I mean, it's a historical thing. What you get on the front is just Al Jolson in standard whiteface, So it wasn't whiteface. Whiteface was an actual thing where you painted yourself to look white, which is really funny when you get to people like, if you've ever seen Casablanca, the piano player there, Dooley Wilson, got his name Dooley because he put on whiteface to play Irish characters. Now that's America, this huge racial mixture. Yeah, talk about cultural appropriation. That's the nature of our country. Live with it. You can't just act like everything is pure. Okay, I'm going off too far that direction. What I want to say is, so now we get the idea this stuff is all wrong. So I'm reading the comments below the CD, and I'm just a little interested. What are people thinking of this? And one guy says, I can't believe they let this illegal music still be sold. Well, for one thing, it was never illegal. And that's the mentality. Erase the past. That is totally Stalinist. That's what Stalin would do. You'd have a picture of Stalin with two of the higher-ups in the Soviet Union. And what would happen is, over time, one of them would suddenly just disappear from the picture, and now there's just Stalin and one person. Why? This person was an unperson. And that's what we're doing, is we are creating unpersons of the past. By doing this, and it's not just in the racial area, it's in all sorts of areas. If we can find any way in which, someone in the past was flawed, there's somebody who wants to erase that person. Well, here's the problem. You erase enough, and you become ignorant yourself because you have no access to history. Coupled with that is the fact that we have perhaps the most juvenile, neotenous population possible. I mean, we essentially have people who stay in adolescence, is one way I've heard it, emerging adulthood. They stay in this zone. They're geeks. Geeks are now mainstream. They live in this world of games and big franchise movies, none of which I have anything against. I mean, I've seen Marvel movies, I've played video games. It's not like it's evil, but the problem is we're living in a culture where it seems there is no arrival to adulthood. Part of that has to do with the fact that we are also living in highly irrational times. But oddly enough, we are living in irrational times precisely because of the hyper-rationality of our technology, which creates one path for you to go. For instance, so let's see. There were cell phones, and then the smartphone showed up in the middle of the aughts. And so it's been about 15 years or so since the smartphone showed up. The cell phone was already changing things, but the smartphone, complete game changer. And we have surrendered to it. We did not control it. It has changed our lives. And if anyone thinks the smartphone has changed our lives from the better, I would just beg to differ with you. I was fully conscious, fully alive prior to this moment. And I can say, oh Lord, I wish we had never invented the smartphone. It has destroyed human conversation. It has created, then adding onto it, social media. And you create this insect-like effect. And the insect effect is we're just constantly sending and getting and receiving things. We can't leave. We're connected to this stuff 24 hours a day. Everything is happening. I mean, there'll be people who will make comments about this stuff, but we're all connected to it. Now, I have a dumb phone. And so, this is my way of, this is as little as I can get rid of. Do you see that? Just nothing. It's a nothing phone. And this is all I have. I don't want the full package because I've watched what the full package does to people. I'm not against technology. I obviously use plenty of it to edit and make these videos. But I spent a while thinking about what I wanted to do. I'm not an early adopter. I'm not even a midway adopter. I watch and watch and watch and then say, yeah, that's how you can use it in a human manner. Well, anyway, so that combined with our eternal juvenilization. We'll say it. Well, juvenility, is that word? Our immaturity. There you go. That's the word. Continuing immaturity, it's the immaturity is an exact reflection of our technology. That is to say, it has become more sophisticated. We have become less. Some people worry about what's going to happen with AI. Well, already the algorithms are pushing you around in all sorts of ways. Every time you watch a YouTube video, every time you go on Amazon, every time you travel around the internet. I mean, I've done plenty of things to stop Google from knowing I exist. I have to have a Google account because I have YouTube. But you know what? I have a Google Gmail account. Never use it. When I'm in YouTube, I'm signed out of Google. I don't use Google for news. I don't use Google for anything. I've checked to see what it knows about my history. Nothing. That's it. I am happy not to be known by Google. I've also put blocks on Facebook. I've got ad blockers. It's funny, now Yahoo is sending these messages to me on my email account there, where it's like I'll be typing in something or looking at something, and then in a few minutes it'll say, oh, looks like you haven't removed your ad blocker yet. Like, they make it seem like you got to do this soon. And then if you don't, now what they're doing is they're saying, you can either go back to basic, or you can check this and, use those advertisements again. I clicked on the basic ones, and it sent you back to some old version of Yahoo. Well, what I do is I just hit go back to the channel again, then it disappears after that. But it's just absolutely annoying. But the point is, you're being scanned and monitored all the time. I mean, but it's also, the algorithms are moving your behavior around. Why do you think you keep, for instance, if you have one specific view of what's going on in the world today, you could be one of the people who are saying like, yeah, well, Black Lives Matter, racism must end, and etc., which obviously racism is a terrifying thing. But you know what? You're just going to get that stuff. You're not going to get anybody who says, well, yeah, Black Lives Matter, but is a world without racism possible? And what kind of governmental system, believe me, there would be a governmental system, would enforce such a regulation? But anyway, that's not Dark Age stuff. That's authoritarian stuff, which I'm not talking about. In a Dark Age, we've surrendered. Well, here's the worst problem. We have surrendered to technology our memories, our cultural memories, our personal memories, our history. I find in America, and I can't speak for other countries, and other countries are better at this. I mean, certainly I feel more of a sense of knowledge about history in France and a lot more sense of knowledge about history here in Georgia. But I know in my own country, the average person I meet really, really doesn't know where things are on a map, nor do they know when things happen. Yeah, you know, if you're under 30 years old, what do you know about the Vietnam War if you're not a guy who's like really interested in warfare and stuff? You know, if you're just an average person. If you're under 20, what do you know about, have you ever heard of World War II? Here's what's really crazy. So there's these memes going around that say things like, shows a landing craft, guys coming out in Omaha Beach, and then it's a sign, Antifa going to start riots among the Nazis. To which I'm simply saying, like, only a person who has absolutely no knowledge of history could have written that, and only a person who is in a certain isolation bubble could have written that. That is to say, because they actually believe people who are telling them that Antifa is not an organization, it's just people against fascism. You know, that's the thing, is we've surrendered what we know to this system. And here's the problem with that in the end. It's not going to take much. Imagine if the Chinese and Americans have a fight, and imagine the chess move the Chinese will make. The Chinese, who we suspect were responsible for the big Sony hack a few years ago. Imagine the chess move they would make for cyber war. I'll let you just imagine whatever you want. Now tell me you think all of your information is safe. If you are that naive and stupid, Lord willing, if you think humanity is that loving and that kind, I hope I'm wrong. But I don't want a dark age to come. I value knowledge. I value the history of life. I value books. I value music. I value culture. But people who only value now, and whenever I hear this phrase, we want this to happen and we want it now. Well, 95% of the time, there are times when things have to change now. But 95% of the time, the word now, it has got a real serious scorpion's tail on it. That is to say, it's about living as if time doesn't exist, which I've done an entire 10-part series on. So if you think I'm just speaking off the top of my head, I can guarantee you I am not. The word now, wanting things now, scares me more than anything. It's along with the notion of wanting perfect things now. That would be like a pretty evil notion, because nothing is perfect. And in order to put things in, you have to put them in their Procrustean bed. And the Procrustean bed is that everything has to fit. And if we can't make it fit, we cut off the legs of people who don't to make them fit into the bed. It's a bit of mythology, look it up. Procrustean bed. So we've locked our knowledge into the virtual, into the cloud. I love this idea. It's like I'm always being asked by my various devices, do you want this in the cloud? No, more than that, I'll see people saying like, why do you have all your movies that you why are you downloading movies still? Why aren't you just streaming them? Why do you save movies on these 4 terabyte, I got one right here, 4 terabyte hard drives that you've got? I'm looking at 3 of them right here. Why do you save this stuff? Even more ominously, from my point of view, I get people saying, why do you want your library from America here with you in Georgia? And I'm sitting there going, because you really think I trust everything happening online? Do you think I trust that I will always be able to get something? All that has to happen is someone decides somewhere X, whatever, is politically incorrect, and you can no longer access it. Well, in my library, I have books that, for many reasons, from many points of view, are politically incorrect. But you know what? I can reach into my library, pull them out, and read books that might be forbidden by somebody. But I can also, I can read books I would enjoy. But the main point is this: in the event of a dark age, I'm not slipping into it that quickly. Personally, well, I'll die probably before then. When I say a dark age, I don't mean it's coming tomorrow morning. I don't mean it's coming like in 5-10 years. I think if what might happen is a civil war or something before that. But I don't even think that'll bring it on. What I'm seeing is a decline. Well, it is decadence already. We have declined from the height of Western civilization. We can argue about when that was, but we're definitely on the downslant now. I think everything after the 60s has pretty much been on the downslant. But, yeah. But, it could take 100 years. But we're putting all of our eggs in one basket. Not ever a good idea. We need to value books, first of all. First and foremost, books. We need to value writing physically. I mean, and if that doesn't case, do you ever print up the stuff that's online and save it somewhere else? You should, if you want to really actually save it, or pass it on to someone if it's something worth passing on to posterity. Music, LPs, CDs. Yeah, that's why I have a huge music collection. And I remember back in 1996 when I was leaving New York City, I was putting everything into a huge container to ship it to Alaska. I had a friend, very well-meaning friend, as he was helping me on a very hot summer day. Well, it wasn't a hot summer day. Well, it was. It was September, but it was still pretty hot. And he and about 10 other people were helping me get all of my boxes down 5 flights of stairs in New York. And he naturally said, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of boxes of books. He said to me, Byrne, why are you doing this? Why don't you simply, sell all this stuff? Well, I would certainly get a lot of money, especially in New York City. I'm not going to get any money for it in Alaska. But why don't you sell all this stuff? And you're going to find it all online anyway. 2 reasons. One, the one I just gave about things being disappeared. Amazon has already started to prohibit certain books. They've been prohibiting. They don't want extreme right-wing material. And by right-wing, I mean Nazi material on there, and I can understand that. But there's other books. Someone questioning what was going on with COVID-19, and they didn't like the guy's take on it. He was questioning, the value of lockdowns. So they thought that was illegal, essentially. It shouldn't be out there, which is kind of strange. I thought we had a society where there was freedom of speech. But that's one reason. You never know what's going to become hard to find. And if you think that everything will simply be remain available, it's just like when I have movies on my shelf. I just want to get a good copy, bring it down. I don't want to have to go through Netflix. I don't have to try, which doesn't have much really. I have access to all sorts of things, and I have plenty of movies that I can't find online. I have a lot more music that I can't find anywhere. In fact, most of my Georgian music collection would be almost impossible to find on, with any regularity online. It's not even copyrighted, a lot of it. So, it's so for me, but also just valuing the physical world. People talk about, like, the world has such great ecological problems. Meanwhile, they're living this new kind of reductionist kind of like, they think they're being so zen by getting rid of their furniture and living in this kind of minimalist way. And I'm sitting there going, like, if you can't take care of things, you don't have any connection to things, the objects, then how are you going to care for the physical world around you? And that's a really important question. So for me, the value of having things is, one, it's just a bulwark. Also, when I'm gone, I hope to pass on my library to someone or something else. Hopefully someone. I much prefer to give it to a person than to give it to an institution, but you never know if there's a good enough institution here in Georgia. But that's part of the problem. It's like, now, for the first time, I've been thinking, looking at what's going on in America, I'm looking ahead and I'm saying, like, Democratic Convention. I have the feeling this is going to be 1968 all over again. Trials of the 4 cops. What if one or two of them doesn't get the full sentence that the mob thinks they did? So the mob thinks that they understand more about law than anyone in the legal world, or the judges, or the lawyers, or anybody, or the jury. So there's that. That would create more riots. And the day after the election in November, whoever wins. But I'm thinking now, I've got this huge library, probably 10,000 pounds worth of stuff in Alaska. I just want to get it here. I don't have quite the resources financially yet to do that. I was thinking of trying to do it this October. My payments run out in October. But it's just not looking good, period, to go back to the U.S. at that time. I mean, maybe, but so I'm going to have to wait another year. But for the first time, I've thought, like, man, am I going to lose all my stuff to the insanity of what's going on around us? Maybe. Am I heartbroken about this? Well, I would be. But, a lot of it's up here, too. It's like already, it's kind of like when I'm desperate to get something, I'll download an image, film or something. I'll order a book. I can get books. Whatever. It's like I'm kind of already starting to do a miniature replication of a library here. But I really do. Someone said, Bern, but why do you have to do that? Why do you have to bring your stuff there? And I said, well, if a person was a jeweler and they made jewelry, would you tell them to go to another country and leave their tools behind? They can't use them. They have to leave them in the country they were. Well, for me, the library is my tools. So I hope that I get that here. That's personal stuff. What I just really wanted to say, what's been on my mind is we are sliding towards a dark age. A time of forgetting. You shouldn't want to be a part of that. You should try to strengthen the things that remain. And that's where I'll leave it. Well, this is Bern. Thanks for listening. Hope I haven't been too depressing. But Jacques Ellul said in his book, Hope in Time of Abandonment, you kind of have to get to the bottom before you start to see the answers. One of the reasons I've spent collecting and building up my library for so long is because a long time ago I already saw this coming. And I figure my little library, it's not the Smithsonian Institute. It's just a little personal library, except it's a lot bigger than most people's personal libraries. But the point is, that's knowledge for people in the future. Maybe it'll help someone. Maybe. We don't know. Well, swim against the stream. Do not go with the flow. Do not. Remember what G.K. Chesterton said, only a dead thing floats downstream. Proof that you're alive, swim against the stream. I don't care which side of what you're on and what you believe. But do not accept everything handed to you as given. Learn to raise questions of the people you agree with, not just the people who are on the other side of whatever aisle from you. Swim against the stream. And we will meet again soon, I hope.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.